Welcome back to our Grace Life Church podcast. I'm your host, Brian Clark. I'm the lead pastor here at Grace Life Church in Greensboro, North Carolina. And we're continuing, and I've got my guest with me, Segun Michaels, one of our outstanding worship leaders here, on the subject of revival. And we're talking about revival in America. We're going to bring this to you over the next couple of weeks and just to sow some seeds and to help share a little bit on the topic of revival so we can all learn together and we can all believe for a great revival in America and throughout the rest of the world together. Last week, we just defined what a revival is, and we talked about it's not just an evangelistic outreach where we say revival is going to be July 10th through July 17th and that sort of thing. It's actually like when an entire community gets an awareness of God. Isaiah 64, God opens the heavens and comes down, so to speak, and people just get this consciousness and awareness. And so we talked about that. Today I want to pick up a different subject, and the subject is this, are revivals, because I've dealt with this. This is why I want to talk about this.
Okay.
Are revivals just these sovereign moves of God that they just come and they just go and we don't have anything to do with that?
What do you think?
What do I have?
What have you found out in your studies about that?
In the 5 years of messages I've taught. Now, and part of why I actually want to address this is because I've had people say, well, we can't make a revival happen. And it'd be great if God would do it, but that's just really up to Him. And I do understand on one hand, like God has to orchestrate events, right? God has to bring key players, key pieces, things to being, and that's God's part. But I also do believe we actually have a part to play because it's in Chronicles where it says, "If my people who are called by my name will turn and pray, I will hear from heaven and heal their land." The implication is if people don't turn and pray, then God's not going to be able to do the things that He needs to do to heal their land. So, in my studies, I mean, revivals don't happen accidentally. It takes intentionality on the part of people.
You talking about that, it's given me kind of mental shift. You know why? Because oftentimes we've heard things like, you can't force God to move. When it doesn't.
Because God doesn't really want to bring revival.
Yeah,
he's just wanting people to die and go to hell, right? That's just.
You hear stuff like that, and subconsciously you start to believe it. That maybe God doesn't want this. And at the same, you just speaking now, it brings to mind the story of the Charles Finney when they go into a city and they tell God that, God, you would move in this city.
Yeah.
That there has to be a move in this city. And, they pray and things happen.
Yeah, because he would send, I can't think of the guy's name now, Daniel Nash. Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Daniel Nash. He would send Daniel Nash in for, days, weeks, sometimes even a couple of months ahead of time. And Finney wouldn't even go into town until Daniel Nash communicated with him like, the city is ready.
Yeah, and they spend time laboring in prayer. And God moves. Because, there are depths to these things, really. There are depths to it, Some people have found a way with God. They have become so intimate with God that they negotiate with God about moves of God. This brings to mind the point of intimacy.
Yeah.
In the place of revival, the intimacy of certain people with God stirs up the atmosphere.
Well, when you said the phrase negotiates with God, it made me think in the Old Testament. Now, listen, we're in the New Testament. We're in a better covenant.
Yeah.
But, where Abraham is having this conversation with God about Sodom and Gomorrah, and, and he starts out, if there's 50 righteous people, will you leave the city? And 45, and I think he worked him down to 10.
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, if he'd have kept going, he could have worked him down to one. And God wouldn't have destroyed Sodom, probably.
Yeah.
Personal opinion, I can't prove that, but it's just he essentially negotiated with God.
Yeah, you speak about the New Testament. We have a better covenant.
That's right.
And we can is no more just a God to us, it's a father to us.
That's right.
So we can't talk to our father and ask for certain things. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, just like you said, I will hear. He said, I will hear. So I think, God, we can talk to God. He can hear our cries for a revival.
Yeah, it's and going back to what we talked about in yesterday's podcast. We were talking about how these great moves of God, they begin with prayer. It was with Wells.
Yeah.
It was with Azusa Street. I mean, they gathered and began to pray at Azusa, and then many other moves of God. Even even if you study out kind of more recent times, like the Jesus People movement in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of heavy prayer that was happening there. Actually, I'll kind of hit a story of intimacy. The guy that founded the Calvary Chapel movement, Chuck Smith, I love this too. God uses the most unusual people to do things. Chuck Smith at this time is like a 45-year-old white guy, looks almost grandfatherly, looks older for his age. But his wife, they lived in like right outside of Los Angeles, and she would go down to the beach and see all these hippies on the beach, and she had such a heart for them. And they began to pray for the hippies, and they wanted to bring the gospel, but they realized we're 25, 30 years too old to be communicating to these people. God sent someone, and anyway, God sent this other hippie named Lonnie Frisbee who had gotten radically saved. And Chuck Smith is the guy, the founder of the Calvary Chapel movement. It has this little small church in somewhere outside of Los Angeles, maybe 80 people, 75, 80 people at that time, and connects with Lonnie Frisbee. And then Lonnie Frisbee begins to go out on the beach and just begins to lead people to the Lord by the droves. I mean, there's pictures of Chuck Smith baptizing people in the Pacific Ocean. And then all of a sudden, this little small church that nobody's ever heard of ends up being, they'd get different buildings, and they've thousands of people, and birth all these other churches all around the nation over the last 50 or 60 years now. But they had this intimacy, they had this heart, and they began to pray, and then God answered their prayer with an unusual way, because the guy that God used was not somebody that any of us would hand select.
Wow. Where was this?
This is kind of the late 60s, and kind of somewhere right around Los Angeles in that area.
Wow.
But people begin to pray. They, out of intimacy, they begin to say, God, I see a problem. I see all these people on the beach that they're doing drugs, they're into sexual perversion, they're into all this stuff, and you got to do something about it, God. Do you think that would have happened had they not prayed?
I'm not sure that would have happened.
So in other words, it's not just a sovereign move
of God. In the place of hunger. Are we hungry enough for it? Are we hungry enough to ask God to move? I think that's a deep factor to it. God, I believe God could decide to do certain things at certain times, but on the wings of prayer and hunger, revivals about it.
Right. What stirs hunger?
I can from my own perspective, my hunger, I believe somebody prayed it into me. I think my mother prayed it into me.
So we're back to prayer.
I believe my mother prayed it to me.
I would say so we're back to prayer, but I think also part of it, at least for me, part of it is hearing what God's done before. Because it's I really believe the whatever's going to happen before, that should be whatever their ceiling was. That's supposed to be our floor. And so we're supposed to build on that, and so I'm excited about what Jesus is doing. Amen.
Amen.